Digital Foundry is sponsored by the powerful, upgradable MSI MPG Infinite X2 desktop PC featuring Intel Core processors and NVIDIA RTX 40 series graphics.
As 2023 comes to a close, it's fair to say that the fighting game genre is in a great spot. Street Fighter 6 and Mortal Kombat 1 were both excellent games, with Street Fighter 6 in particular righting the wrongs of its prior numbered entry. And now in January of next year, Bandai Namco will unleash Tekken 8, and I've played a near final version of it at an event just last week, so wanted to share my initial thoughts. After all, this is the first new fighting game to ship on Unreal Engine 5, while also skipping last generation consoles and the Switch. So, what can you expect? Well, during the demo, I had a chance to play several different modes, including the story mode, the arcade quest mode, and even Tekken Ball. For as feature-packed as Street Fighter 6 and MK1 are, there is this feeling that Tekken 8 might actually offer even more. So, firstly I started with the story mode, and we were able to play through the first chapter, but based on this, it kind of feels like a natural evolution of what they did in Tekken 7, via a formula that arguably pioneered in Mortal Kombat 9. That is, cutscenes and event sequences are used to chain battles together to tell a larger story. The new game does not seem to rely on those interstitial still image sequences, the scenes featuring a journalist explaining his investigation into the Mishimas in Tekken 7. We can only show chapter 1 here, of course, and that's what's also in the demo version, but I was able to play beyond this point and noticed that the pacing of the story felt like a significant improvement over the 7th game. I admit, I'm a sucker for this style of mode in modern fighting games. The stories are often silly, of course, but it's fun to follow and fleshes out each character's personality. The very first battle featuring Jin and Kazuya is a nice showpiece for the new visuals. There are some pre-rendered scenes still, but many of the sequences are fully real-time, making for some slick transitions between cutscene and gameplay. The version we're looking at, by the way, was captured on PlayStation 5, and I did some preliminary pixel counting here while playing the story mode, revealing a resolution of 2560 by 1440. Of course, we'll count in more detail across more scenes in the final game, but thus far it seems that they've reached a 1440p 60fps target for this one. While the designs are somewhat over the top, one could say, I'm largely pleased with the visuals on display here. Character detail is extremely well done. It blows past the pre-rendered CGI seen in many earlier Tekken games, in fact. I only wish the motion blur from the 6th game were an option, as I always thought that looked great, and we see motion blur in titles such as Street Fighter 6. But seeing that this is an Unreal Engine 5 game, what about those new Unreal Engine 5 specific features such as Lumen and Nanite? Well, at the event, I did have a brief chance to speak with two key members of the development team, specifically the game's director, Ikeda-san, and one of its producers, Michael Murray. They confirmed, as I surmised, that Tekken 8 does not utilize Nanite or Lumen, and this is primarily down to its strict 60 frames per second target that was decided upon from the beginning. As a fighting game, I would expect nothing less than this, and based on my experiences, that target is met. The game runs very fluidly. The only minor dips that I noticed occurred during non-playable sections, specifically when the screen was flooded with particles. Even that, however, is relatively rare, and the fights played out at a perfect 60 frames per second. And that really is the thing about fighting games like this, is that you really need to hit that 60 FPS target perfectly for the best results. The fact that Tekken retains 60 FPS even during most of the cinematic sequences or the special moves that you can pull off is also to be commended. This was always a complaint I had with recent Mortal Kombat games. When you would cut to, say, an X-ray attack, it would drop to 30 FPS. It didn't negatively affect gameplay per se, but it definitely robbed the game of some fluidity, and you don't get that in Tekken 8. So knowing this, yeah, it makes sense that they would omit Lumen and Nanite from this game. Given the challenges that many developers have faced in building first-generation UE5 games, it makes sense to omit these features, especially when performance is so critical. And it definitely looks great as is. I went back to play around with Tekken 7 afterwards, and was surprised that my memories had led me astray. The game is perhaps less detailed than I thought. Between the geometric density of the characters, to the skin shading and clothing and more, Tekken 8 is a significant leap forward. During one of the characters' introductions, if we pause the video, just look at the amount of granular detail presented in their respective gloves. The texture of the leather, the stitching running along the side, the shiny spherical decorations on top. You only ever really see it this close for just a couple frames, but it looks really good. Going through the capture frame by frame really helps you appreciate the animation on display too. The hit impacts, the particles, everything necessary to ensure that each and every hit feels great without sacrificing responsiveness. Compared to the demo that was just released on PS5 though, I did have a chance to play around with other characters in arenas during my time with the game, and I think they all looked pretty great, with a lot of fine detail chiseled across the various surfaces, either using geometry or smart texture work. While the backgrounds in Tekken 7 always looked pretty good, I would say that they suffered from a little bit of that mid-generation Unreal Engine 4 look, and the extra detail you get in this new game definitely pushes it up to a new level, as you'd expect of course. Beyond this, the Arcade Quest mode really piqued my interest. It basically drops you into a fictional world in which Tekken 8, as an arcade machine no less, just released and everyone is excited about it. It seems like it'll tell you a story as you travel around the land visiting other arcades and challenging other Tekken players. It's effectively a second story mode. It uses these stylized characters to sort of differentiate itself from the main Tekken visual design, but I think it works pretty well. I just hope these other Namco arcade games are playable in the final game, similar to what Capcom did with Street Fighter 6. Then there's Tekken Ball, which is perhaps more of a gimmick mode in line with Tekken Bowl from Tag Tournament, but hey, it could be enjoyable as a side mode. Here you basically have to bounce this beach ball back and forth, and if you hit your opponent with it or if the ball falls on their side, they take damage. I also noticed that across every mode, the game's input response seems really solid. When I first sat down at the demo station, of course, they had motion smoothing enabled, so it felt wrong initially, but once we switched over to game mode, it seemed great. Then, thanks to the demo's release, I was able to test it more thoroughly at home, and as best as I can tell, it has just over 3.5 frames of lag or so, and it ends up feeling really responsive. Compared to Tekken 7 on PS4, it's noticeably more responsive, which is a very good thing as it's something Unreal Engine fighting games did struggle with for a bit. And if the last game is any indication, you should be able to reduce this further when played on a PC, but we'll have to wait for the final game to see. Furthermore, on PS5 at least, the loading times are extremely fast, clocking in at just over 4 seconds between battles, certainly faster than the last handful of Tekken games, and it flows nicely with this solid versus screen. All this is to say that everything feels quick, responsive, and impactful, and I'm really happy with what the team seems to have delivered here. It's certainly a prettier game than the last entry, and it feels even better to play. I'm also excited about the game's soundtrack, of course. Namco never misses when it comes to music in their games, and the music we've heard thus far is pretty good. Here's a sample. So Tekken 8 then, it is shaping up pretty well and I'm excited to get my hands on it in January. While the jury is obviously still out on the game as a whole, I think at this point we can say with confidence that the technology side of things is shaping up pretty well. Obviously as it begins to hit other platforms we'll take a look at those too, but for now I'm going to have to leave it there. So if you enjoyed this video be sure to let us know and we'll see you next time.
MSI's MPG Infinite X2 PC features powerful Intel Core processors, the latest RTX 40 series graphics, and supports DDR5 memory up to 128GB, with advanced CPU cooling via MSI's own 240mm all-in-one cooler and system thermals handled by the Silent Storm Cooling 2 solution. Every major component in the system is upgradable with a toolless design for easy access. A tempered side panel and MSI Mystic Light RGB adds to the aesthetic, and the latest Wi-Fi 6E networking is supported. Check the link in the video description for full details on the MSI MPG Infinite X2, the all-new MSI gaming desktop.